Welcome to Homefront on County Cable Montgomery. I'm Mike Subin, representing the county's Commission on Veterans Affairs. Homefront takes you inside the stories of Montgomery County's veterans. Today we have a special edition of Homefront, John McCain the Man, a true American hero. I'm honored today to have a very special guest, retired Navy Commander Everett Alvarez Jr. On August 5, 1964, in the aftermath of the Tonkin Gulf incident, Commander Alvarez, then a lieutenant junior grade, was piloting an A-4 Skyhawk off the USS Constellation while participating in Operation Pierce Arrow. He became the first American pilot shot down in the Vietnam War and was incarcerated by the North Vietnamese as a prisoner of war for 8.5 long years, and became the second longest held U.S. prisoner of that war. For much of the time, he was in what became known as the Hanoi Hilton. A federal prisoner of war held there was John McCain, then a lieutenant. On a personal note, as a young officer candidate and ensign, Commander Alvarez and Captain McCain were held out as our models of patriotism, bravery, loyalty, and dedication and endurance. They were our heroes. Commander Alvarez, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure being here.
Just as a note, this is like at least the third time you've been here. You were a guest speaker when we dedicated the Memorial Plaza right next to the Executive Office building, and then our guest speaker again at the dedication of our Vietnam Memorial Wall.
Right.
And we have been 3 times honored by you.
Well, thank you.
Commander, could you briefly describe John McCain, the man?
John McCain was a unique person. He had a very, I would say, illustrious career. As a young man, he was known amongst his peers as a maverick in a way, which is something, it's a brand that stuck with him all his life.
And we'll cover that later too.
But in those days, John was really rebelling against what he knew and what his place would be in life, having to do with his lineage. His father, his grandfather were Navy admirals, and he was expected to follow suit. And for some reason, as a young man in high school, at the academy, he really rebelled against that. Just to give you an example, he graduated from the Naval Academy as near the bottom of the class as you can get without being thrown out. This was by design. There was a lot of stories about John as a young man, and if you read some of his books, some of his antics, this was before Vietnam, before he was shot down. He would do things that would go against norms, especially Navy customs and what have you. I mean, it was just one story after another. But when he was shot down and went through the experience he did and came out, he still remained a maverick in essence, but it was in a different sense altogether, because John, as he used to say, recognized that he fell in love with his country while he was at the Hanoi Hill. A lot of us experienced the same thing. And so when he came out, it was with a different goal in life. He had a purpose. And as he expressed many times, it was to serve a cause greater than himself. And so I would say that was his hallmark throughout his career. But I can cite you many examples of, as a young ensign, Lieutenant J.G., and the antics he would pull, and then of course as I got to know him better at post-Vietnam, of the causes and the battles that he fought for what he thought was not only right, but causes that were in the best interest of his country.
Reminds me that when we were ensigns, we probably did a lot of those same things.
I can't say.
I won't tell the stories, but we'll leave it at that. After your release and repatriation, did you develop a personal relationship with Senator McCain?
I did. I didn't really get to know John that well while a POW, Mike. I really met John towards the end of the war when the Vietnamese put us in a large group where we occupied a large portion of what was the Hanoi Hilton. And we got to mix, and the barriers between the cells came down. And so there was a lot of free movement and what have you. And I remember, we had heard a lot about, as we did other prisoners of wars through our covert communication system, we kept tabs with what was going on throughout the camps. We knew who was being hauled off to interrogations, who was ill, and everything that was happening because of our really good communication system. So we knew, even though I hadn't met John, I knew what he had been through, who he was, and what have you. And I remember distinctly one day as we're mixing in the large grounds, and I'm at one end, and I look across, and here was this fellow that was standing in a doorway of one of the big cells, and everybody that was coming in and out, he was shaking their hand, he was patting them on the back, he was very animated. And I said to the fellow next to me, I said, who's that fellow standing there? They said, oh, that's Johnny McCain. They called him Johnny McCain. And I looked at that and I said, that guy's going to be a politician someday. And
you called that one right.
Yeah, sure did. The rest is history. But I did get to know John a lot better, especially when I came back to Washington. I retired from the Navy here in Washington, D.C., and then I was asked to join the Reagan administration. That's about the time John was starting to get into his political phase of his life. And so we happened to share a lot of the stage at events and what was happening. And I remember at one point we were both co-chairs for George W. Bush. We were co-chairs of the Veterans Coalition for George H.W. Bush, the father. And then from then on, it was just a lot of activity and working closely with him. And when he decided to run for president later on, I was one of the very few that started to travel with him. I was able to do that just to go him as he started trekking across the country, raising funds, getting on the media, and making his candidacy known. So we were very involved with the first campaign. I was, and of course, the second campaign too. So over the years, I would say that we always had developed a close bond.
Didn't your bond with him and your families become so close that you served as a pallbearer at his burial at the Naval Academy?
Yeah. Well, by that time, when he was ill, he started to, as he was undergoing treatment at the end here, it was sad because we know that the illness that he had was really fatal. It was just a matter of time. And I recall the last conversation I had with John, where I had called his office to see how he was doing, and that evening he called me back, and we had a good chat. And I remember distinctly that his comment was that Everett, you and I, we've been through a lot together, and it was at that point that his voice started to crack and he couldn't talk, and it was more emotional than anything else. And that was hard for me. That was hard. That was about 4 or 5 months before he actually passed away. And then beginning of May this year, I got a call from Mark Salter, who worked very close with him, was his co-author in his books, and said that John has asked that I be a pallbearer at his funeral. And I immediately said yes, I would be there. It was a very emotional day for all of us. That who were included in that at that event. It was a very hot day. It's almost a mile walk from the chapel at the Naval Academy to the cemetery.
And there's no shade.
Well, there's shade at the beginning, but it was hot and sultry. And anyway, there's no way I was going to let the others show me up, and I was not going to jump in a car.
I imagine it's still very emotional, and that'll never go away.
It was quite an event, particularly because of the outpouring, the national outpouring of gratitude and of that he received from the nation, starting with the ceremony in Arizona, and then at the National Cathedral, and what have you. The feelings of people and the commentaries that I've had ever since of condolences for my friend having passed away. I mean, I've just received so many. But it's indicative of something that was really unique. Presidents don't get this kind of a send-off. John did, and he was a senator, but he was a figure. He was a very unique individual. He had a personality, and that was very ingratiating. And again, he worked harder. He worked very hard, but generally speaking, he worked hard because he felt he wanted to do this for his country.
You bring that up about how he was regarded. Mm-hmm. Ran twice for president, mm-hmm. Lost twice, but yet he was still treated around the nation as
right.
If he had, and that was people of both parties, Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
What do you think were the tributes coming from?
It came from all quarters, Mike. His quest in terms of service to a cause greater than oneself it reverberated positively to the American people, and they want to see our leaders who can work together and get things done. And he was always looking for opportunities to do that, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So I think that that in itself was symbolized the gratitude that the nation demonstrated in his at the ceremonies at the Academy, but primarily at the National Cathedral, thousands. And he was a leader. He was a model that people could look up to in terms of how leaders should be, how leaders should act, how leaders should work. And hopefully, maybe we'll start to see more of that.
Well, we're going to cover that more later in the show, but right now we'll be back after we take a short break.
Did you know there are more than 10,000 county government phone numbers? But there's only one number you need to remember for non-emergency calls, 311. MC311 is Montgomery County government's online telephone information system. Need information? Have a problem or complaint? Trying to locate a county government facility? Call 311. The call center is open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The website is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
"7,000 high school students drop out every school day. That's a line of desks more than 4 miles long. We can keep students in school. Visit boostup.org and take the first step."
Welcome back to Homefront on County Cable Montgomery. I'm Mike Subin. I'm here with special guest, retired Navy Commander Everett Alvarez Jr. Welcome back, Commander.
Thank you.
Quickly getting back to Senator McCain and the period he was detained in, he was tortured to the extremes of human endurance. There's no question about that. Were you and the others aware of the extraordinary torture he was going through?
Yes. But let me just also add that what John went through, most of us went through. And I mean, that was just something that came with the territory of being a POW, especially if you were shot down the first 5 years of the war. But given our really good communication system where we were able to tap through the walls and we kept everything, we were aware of not only John's experience and what he was going through, but everybody else when they were taken out for interrogation and then having to go through what we did. With regard to John, you know, when he was first shot down, he was pretty seriously injured, and I and others are of the belief that had he not been taken to the hospital, he would have died. But lo and behold, the Vietnamese found out who his father was. Father was Commander-in-Chief Pacific Forces. And so they felt, hey, they really have a bargaining chip here. So they did take him to the hospital where they put him in a body cast, and I'm not sure what other treatment he had. But when that was finished, they brought him in and put him in a cell. And I'm convinced that they thought he was not going to make it, where he was put in with other Americans. And then gradually, when he was offered a release as part of a propaganda ploy or whatever it was at the time, John refused, and that was something that we generally had a policy of no early release. We don't accept that. So he went along with that, and as a result, he suffered the torture that you described to go. And he, like everybody else that went through this, that came home alive, we eventually broke and confessed to war crimes or what have you.
I'd like to cover that in a minute.
Good.
But you give me a great segue into the whole issue of what was going on with the releases and here, if you do this, we'll do that for you. And I'd like to turn to the Military Code of Conduct and its application during times of war. Article 3 states, I will accept neither parole nor special favors from the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Article 5 states, I will make no oral or written statements disloyal to my country or its allies that is harmful to their cause. Mm-hmm. Now, taken together, those two articles have been interpreted to also now include, I will give them nothing that they can use as propaganda. So you said he was offered the special favor of, we'll give you an early release. And he refused to accept that. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Why? Because our policy was we all stayed together. We had a really, really strong bond. We had a very good military organization, covert organization, but it was essential that it be a very close and close-knit organization, and because in order to achieve our goal, and our goal as a group was to survive. So John, in keeping with his belief that the cause was greater than the self, he actually felt that the cause of returning home, all of us together with honor, was a cause greater than himself. And I think that's one of the experiences he learned as a lesson. Can I also say about Article 5?
Yes.
Article 5 was something that we did our utmost to hold to. But if you go through, when we found ourselves being subjected to barbaric methods, really barbaric, where they would break arms, they would, circulation, they cut them, and my arms were cut off. It was just so much painful for like an extended period of time. Things like that you finally, in order to ease the pain, they weren't going to let you die, but they knew what they were doing. And we broke. Every time, I mean, when that happened, every man pretty much can describe it the same way. You felt like the biggest traitor. You felt like you had to let your fellows down. You had to let your country down. But because we were a unit, you know, our overall goal was to, you know, do the best we can under the circumstances. And we had a policy. It was bounce back, get through this, and then get ready, because they're going to come back again, and they're going to come back again for more and more. And you want to be able to resist each time they come back, till the point where they just leave you alone and you're considered the blackest of criminals. We weren't POWs in their eyes. We were criminals, and they treated us like that. Very, very barbaric. So, you know, sticking to those principles. I was talking to somebody who was involved in drafting the first code of conduct, and that article right there originally was to resist and don't accept early release. Don't make statements. Don't write to the best of your ability. And somehow that latter part fell off when they published it. I used to tease my fellows because we all hung together, but I said, well, it's a good thing they didn't let the Marines know that do the best to the best of your ability, because they, you know, tell it to the Marines.
Well, as someone who spent probably a third to a half of his career in amphibious warfare, I have to admit.
Yep.
Semper Fi,
Yep.
I love the Marines.
I agree. I agree.
You know, you said that, you know, they would take you to the limits of endurance.
Right.
And at some point, everybody would crack.
Everybody that came home. There were those that didn't and went beyond, and most of those didn't come back.
I imagine all this is very difficult to talk about, so we appreciate your bringing those perspectives.
Well, you know, it was difficult. For many years, I didn't talk about it. Then in 1988, I wrote my first book. And it was the first time I talked about it. 15 years after returning from Vietnam, we started. And it was emotional. It was hard. But I think that as I talk more about it, and others the same way, it becomes easier. And what it really, I think, the benefit of discussing it and talking about it is it gives me the ability to articulate it in a manner I can put it across. It was rough talking about it, and I think it's I do a better job of it now.
Well, what I tell people all the time is there are stories we can tell everybody.
Sure.
And sometimes many of those we laugh about.
Yeah.
There are stories we can tell our spouses, and then there are stories we can only tell ourselves.
And that holds true for the experience as a POW in the Hanoi Hilton. When we get together and have our reunions, Mike, you know, there's a lot of laughter about the funny little things that happen, and we talk about those things. And we don't talk about the tough times. We don't. It's just something that happened, and we went through it. But I think overall, it was an experience that, in a way, we came out better persons for having gone through that experience. And going back to John McCain, he came out a different person, like many of us did. He came out a better person in the sense he had a purpose, and he followed those ambitions. And yeah, he had a very, very good career.
You know, getting back to the code of conduct and moving forward from you and the senator's days as a POW to several years ago, a Navy lieutenant surrendered his patrol boat to some Iranian warships. And I'm not going to get into nor criticize the fact that he surrendered, because we've all been in those circumstances where you have to make an instantaneous decision. You have to make an instantaneous decision on can I get out of here? What happens if I fight? And do we have any chances of getting out of here without me sacrificing all of my people? But in this case, the crew was only held for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. And the lieutenant made a statement which would have contradicted the code, I believe, in Article 5, where he praised the Iranians for how they were treated. Did you and the senator have any discussions about that? How did you feel?
And we did not, that I can recall. But again, as you indicated, Mike, it's hard to criticize the actions of another person, a leader, an officer, without knowing the circumstances and not the situation that he was in and what have you. And so I really don't feel that it would be fair for me to say anything about what happened. It was a little bit unusual, but in terms of his comments when he was released. But again, I'm not very familiar, or at all familiar with the details of what went on.
I'd like to get back to the senator's public life now and the issue where he was regarded as a maverick. Mm-hmm. It seems that not in his early personal life as a maverick, but in his political life, that name stuck because he many times went against what his party was doing. But he was a product of Senator Scoop Jackson, mm-hmm. From Washington, a Democrat who did make a career of reaching across. In fact, it was at a time where if you talked about foreign affairs, mm-hmm. it was characterized as politics stops at the water's edge,
right?
Which is absolutely the opposite of what we're seeing today. Did he ever talk to you about the issue of being labeled a maverick and the politics of today?
Well, we had many discussions, particularly during the first campaign, and at those kind of times when I traveled with him, particularly during trips on the Straight Talk Express, and he really. He would, we talk about the way it was before when things were able to get accomplished on the Hill, and he really longed for that, and he looked for ways to do it, reaching across. Interesting comment, though, in one of those trips, there was a fellow there listening to everything that was going on, or a fellow whose name was Walter Isaacson. And I asked Walter one day, I says, why are you supporting him? And he says, because he tells me like it is. He tells me the truth. And
well, I think his personality and his character are wrapped up in the fact that when he ran for president, he ran against President Bush, ran against President Obama, lost to both of them, but requested that they speak and deliver his eulogies.
Right.
The mark of a true man and patriot. There's so much more we can talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time. And I want to thank retired Commander Everett Alvarez Jr., United States Navy, for coming here to talk about his experiences in Vietnam and his good friend John McCain.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today I'm just an aluminum can, but one day I could be a stadium.